Hello and welcome to part two of my look at the Flashman novels for Millennials. And I last left it, Flashman was involved in the Indian Mutiny, that's 1857-58. So now moving on to 1859, and we have this, Flashman and the Angel of the Law. This is another particular favourite of mine. So Flashman's back in America. And what happens is that it's 1859. And we're just about to head into the US presidential elections of 1860, which will carry deep repercussions. And so Flashman gets involved in the politics, the build-up to that, the foundation of the Republican Party. He crosses paths with Abraham Lincoln again, who is not seen as the front runner for the presidential nomination. But the crux of the story is Flashman going undercover into John Brown's abolitionist band. And Flashman ends up going on the raid at Harper's Ferry, which was a famous incident in the immediate build-up to the American Civil War, where John Brown held up he captured a train station that was part of the transporting slaves in the South, and so this is a fascinating one. The action's really good in this one. It gives again. I mean, this is something that I knew of, the Harper's Ferry raid, but this gave so much detail, and it's great if you want to learn about the kind of activities that were going on in the American abolitionist movement at the time, and about John Brown, and why there's a song, John Brown's body lies mouldering in the grave, but his spirit marches on. It's contained in this one. So for historical detail, this one it's a corker. Okay, so moving on. This happens to be my personal favourite in the series, Flashman and the Dragon. And this does everything it's expected to do. Again, like Flashman in The Great Game, it doesn't seem that big a novel, but it's packed full of incident. This one covers 1861 and the Taiping Rebellion, which is the bloodiest civil war in recorded history. And I knew very little. I'd heard the name the Taiping Rebellion. I knew it was the Second Opium War. And I knew just scant information about it. After reading this, I knew a lot more, and I was inspired to read a lot more as well. This is one of these events in history I think that should be better studied, better known. And Fraser does a fantastic job. As I said, these books serve as great primers for expanding your historical knowledge. So this one, like Flashman in The Great Game, it's got action, it's got a bit of comedy, but it goes dark in some places. I mean, not surprising, this is the bloodiest civil war in history, and there are some shocking moments in this novel. I won't blow the plot spoilers, but there are moments where you get to the end of the chapter and you just need to take a deep breath, do something else for a while before returning to reading it. But it is a personal favourite of mine because it's just packed full of fantastic history, and the plot rattles along, and the character, the real life characters that Flashman meets along the way are all fascinating as well. Lord Elgin, the leader of the Taipings, Chinese Gordon, all these real life people. Garnet Wolsey as well, I think, crops up in there. So it's just absolutely fantastic. It's my personal favourite. So where are we? We're in the 1860s with Flashman. He's getting on a bit, Flashman. He's in his 40s, coming up to 50 now. So I'm going to do Flashman on the March. Now, this one was the last one that Fraser wrote, but it's not the last in the series if you follow the historical chronology. Now, I've read this twice. Now, the first time, I mean, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed it. But I felt like I was going over familiar territory with Fraser because he's done this kind of motif before. There's Flashman. He's in some kind of Victorian war on behalf of the British Empire. There is a dusky maiden who's quite handy with a sword and with a voracious sexual appetite. And I felt like, oh yeah, I've kind of read lots of this in Flashman before, the formula, as it were. However, on a second reading, I've changed my opinion, and I think this is a cracking one. Again, this is dealing with an incident that's not well known, which is the Abyssinian War of 1867 to 68. And it's an interesting one because what I appreciated on the second reading, as opposed to the first reading, is this book is very much about a clash of ideas. It's not just Flashman having a romp against his will and getting involved with Dusky Maiden, who's with a voracious sexual appetite and who's handy with a sword. The central premise is that there's some British civilians being held captive by this mad Abyssinian king called Theodore, who is kind of detached from reality. He's a genius, but he's detached from reality. And the British have got to go in and rescue these civilians before they suffer a fate worse than death. So there's a kind of, on the British side, there's this kind of moral imperative that you don't often get in some of the other Flashman novels. I think you get the Victorian morality, but it's always being played to an advantage. In Flashman on the March, the campaign against Theodore can go horribly wrong, and there's not much in the way of tangible reward for the British, other than the fact that they're doing this campaign because it's the right thing, because civilian lives are in danger. And Flashman is not one to get involved in these kind of moralistic crusades anyway. But the real-life personages, you've got King Theodore, who I'd never heard of before. But contrasted with that, it's the other major not fictional, but historical character, which is General Robert Napier, who is a very kind and benevolent and moral military leader. And their personalities do contrast, and there's Flashman sort of stuck in the middle. Not that he's ever going to back King Theodore. Flashman is always backing himself just to get away from the situation. But yeah, I mean, reading this a second time, I appreciated it a lot more. I realised what Fraser was going for was a bit deeper than, say, the usual Flashman getting involved in some historical event. You have the juxtaposition between moralities and civilizations. So yeah, this is a little hidden gem. Even up just before his death, Fraser's powers as a novelist had not waned. Right, so I'm going to return now to Flashman and the Redskins. So the second half of the book is called The 76er. And like I say, Flashman and the Redskins, that's politically incorrect. I'm triggered by the title. Funnily enough, it's the only Flashman novel not to have a half-clad woman on the front cover. But let's put this into proper perspective, millennials here. It says the Redskins, but this is the common Victorian parlance of the time. It would look odd if it Flashman and the Native Americans or First Nation people, because it's not Victorian enough. It wouldn't convey. It would seem anachronistic if you change the title. So the 76er follows on from events. So he's now late middle age at this time, and he's on holiday in America with his wife, and after meeting President Grant, who he knew from Civil War days, he gets roped into accompanying General George Armstrong Custer out west, and I think you can already guess what's going to happen. Flashman gets involved in perhaps one of the most famous battles ever to take place on American soil. And as we know, they all got massacred. So how does Flashman get out of that one? Well, I'm not going to blow the spoilers. But things that happened in Flash for Freedom come to fruition in the second half of this book. So, it completes that kind of that mini-series. It completes the cycle there. Okay. So I don't know. I mean, I read this, right? I read this all in one go. Okay, there's 49. If you're going to get involved in the Flashman series, as an exercise, try just reading the first half. the 49er, and then read the other books, and then come back and read the 76ers. See if it, or should you read it all in one go so you're closer to the references in the earlier novels? I don't know. But it might be interesting to try it, sort of splitting the novel in half and coming back to the second half later. Which brings me to the last book. Not the last book. This was the penultimate book that Fraser wrote, but it kind of is the last chronologically. And even then, not even that, not quite, because it's 3 books in one. It's a more collection of, I'd say, a novelette and 2 short stories is the best way to describe this. So, of which Flashman and the Tigris is like the last part of this. So it's got 3 stories, and the first one is called The Road to Charing Cross. So again, Flashman's quite old here. He's just got out of an incident with Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, and he ends up back in Central Europe, having to protect the life of the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. And there's some events that happen in Royal Flash that get followed up in that story. The second one is called The Subtleties of Baccarat. This one, again, features his wife Elspeth. She accidentally causes one of the greatest scandals of the late Victorian era, but completely by mistake. And it's a good one because it gets her involved into the story, and it's not violence. It's kind of more Victorian social politics. It's nice to have that a little bit of a change in the Flashman papers. And the third one is Flashman the Tiger. This one's a little bit controversial, the Flashman the Tiger story, because it starts off in the Zulu War, the Battle of Rorke's Drift, and you just get a whistle-stop tour of Rorke's Drift. It's not really in-depth. But at Rorke's Drift, Flashman meets Tiger Jack Moran. And then their paths separate. And then in the 1890s, Flashman's granddaughter is involved in a scandal with Moran. Moran seems intent on ruining Flashman's life by using his granddaughter against her. So Flashman decides he's going to take action. This is family now. Even though he's not convinced, he knows Moran is like an expert shot and quite deadly. But somehow he's got to save his granddaughter from this man. Now, Jack Moran, name might ring a bell. A man called Moran in the late Victorian era who's a sharpshooter. Well, that's because Tiger Jack is just a nickname. His actual name is Sebastian Moran, a former colonel in the British Army. Colonel Sebastian Moran. Yes, it's that Colonel Sebastian Moran from Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is why this story is controversial, because one fictional world is just about to bump into another. Now, earlier on in the series, Tom Brown's School Days is mentioned, and he does have a brief meeting with Tom Brown. But the thing is that Flashman sprung from the Tom Brown School Days novel, so it doesn't seem incongruous that characters from that novel should subsequently meet Flashman. But to take the Sherlock Holmes canon and put it into Flashman's world seems, well, some fans felt that it was not breaking the fourth wall, but it was kind of a crossover nobody particularly wanted. However, Fraser just about manages to pull it off. Yes, there is an appearance from the great detective himself, although it's done in a really comedic way. I won't blow the joke, but it's done quite well. And that brings us to the end of Flashman's chronology. Now, the thing is, every Flashman novel begins with a kind of who's who entry for the character, listing his honours, his awards, and the campaigns that he's been in just very brief bullet points. And Fraser mapped out a lot more things that Flashman was involved in. So the American Civil War, the Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, the Zulu Wars, I think maybe the Ashanti campaign, various other things that Flashman is meant to have been involved in. And Fraser died before he could write any of these things. Now, one of the interesting things, the fans for years were waiting for the American Civil War novel to come out. I don't know. It could have been called A Flashman Divided. However, in an interview not long before his death, Fraser answered the calls for the American Civil War novel to be written, saying he wasn't going to write it at all because he actually found the American Civil War itself boring. He was interested in the antebellum, the build-up to it, and he novelized those incidents. But as for the Civil War itself, he didn't think he wanted to write it. He did the research and just found it too dull for Flashman. And he said, "Well, look at it this way: Flashman fought on both sides of the American Civil War. That's how disinterested he was in the whole thing." So sadly, we never got the American Civil War novels. The stuff with Emperor Maximilian is mentioned very briefly at the start of Road to Charing Cross, but we don't really get a full picture and reasons why Flashman's out there or what went wrong. So we don't get that, and we don't get the Zulu Wars and the full Rorke's Drift one. It's just a thumbnail description of the battle. So sadly, that wasn't done. Now, in other historical novels or other novel series, other writers come in to pick up the baton. This was done with James Bond novels. I think there's 5 official Bond novelists who have penned follow-ups to the Bond series. There's an official follow-up to it was a prequel for Jane Eyre, I think Dark Sargasso Sea. So there have been other attempts for another writer to carry on a series. So far, nobody has stepped forward. I think that level of historical research is so much that it would be a great undertaking for any novelist, and they'd have to get the Flashman voice, that style of writing precisely right. So I don't know if there's a novelist out there who could do it. And sadly, Flashman's other exploits will remain a mystery for the foreseeable future. But do check them out. As I said, as an insight into the Victorian era, and it's not a hagiography of the Victorian era either. Pulls no punches in certain areas, but it's certainly not Marxist at all. There's no historical revisionism in this. It's kind of very, I'd say it is balanced. Perhaps it is told from the perspective of a Victorian Englishman, but on the other hand, it's done in a way that doesn't massively contradict the actual history, unless it's designed to for entertainment, to move the plot along. But what the Flashman novels do is kind of explore the spaces in the history, the gaps that we don't know that much about. So I'll leave you to it. Do check out these novels. I will see you hopefully Sunday for another edition of the Weekly Biscuit. And I haven't thought about what my non-political video will be next week. Got some ideas, but anyway, I make this up. Everything I do, I make it up as I go along. So until next time, good night.